First tonight to Gaza, where the US military has started building a floating pier off the coast with the intention of boosting humanitarian aid deliveries. The pier is expected to be in operation by early next month. The plan was first announced by President Joe Biden in March as part of efforts to prevent famine in Gaza as Israel continues its war there. We'll have more on that story in a moment. But staying in Gaza, a Palestinian baby girl who was rescued from her dying mother's womb after an Israeli airstrike in the territory has died. Sabrine Al-Rou was delivered by emergency cesarean section after her mum was seriously wounded when an airstrike hit the family home in Rafah on Sunday. Doctors said the baby had suffered respiratory problems and a weak immune system. She's been buried in Rafah alongside her mother, her father, and 3-year-old sister, who were all killed in the Israeli airstrike. The Israeli Defense Forces say they were targeting Hamas fighters. At least 34,356 Palestinians have been killed and more than 77,000 wounded in Israel's military offensive on Gaza.
My brother's name has been completely wiped from the civilian register. When they first delivered her from her mother's womb, I went to the hospital consistently to check on her and see the doctors and ask them about how she is doing, and they would say she is doing well but she has slight problems with her breathing but nothing to be worried about. I wanted to get her out. The doctor said things are fine and what God wants is what will happen in the end. Yesterday I was surprised to get a call from the management of the Emirati hospital, asking whether I was the uncle of Sabrine Al-Rou. I said yes. They told me that the girl weakened. It was only 10 hours between the time I was there with her and when I received the news. He said the girl faced complications and she has passed away. My brother and his wife were ready for the new baby. They had prepared their things for the girl. Their bags were ready. They felt she was coming in the 7th month of pregnancy. This girl, they had prepared the bag, the pampers, everything. He felt that his daughter was going to be born in the 7th month, and truly, they were all martyred and she was born in the 7th month. Rou is gone, my brother is gone, his daughter is gone, and his relative, referring to his brother-in-law, is gone, and gone is the home that gathered us all together. We were hoping to find a memento from my brother, among the rubble, memories of his daughter, memories of his wife. There is nothing, everything is gone. Everything. Even their photos, we wanted to find them, among the rubble, but we couldn't. We wanted to find their mobile phones but couldn't. We have found nothing, no traces of my brother are left.
Now in Germany, police have been clearing a pro-Palestinian protest camp set up in front of the parliament in Berlin. Activists are demanding the government stop arms exports to Israel and end what they say is the criminalization of the Palestinian solidarity movement. Police dismantled tents, forcibly removed protesters and blocked the surrounding area to stop others arriving.
We are calling for ceasefire, we are calling for the implementation of international law, also for Palestinians. We call for the implementation of human rights, also for Palestinians. 6 months into an ongoing genocide, those who point at us, those who are in power here in Germany and accuse us as allegedly anti-Semites, as extremists, as Israel haters, to my understanding this government is a government of nothing less but a government of genocide lovers.
Our experience with this protest since it started on April 8th showed that there were repeated violations of the official regulations and also crimes which were committed, such as suspected hate speech and resistance, threats and attacks against police officers.
Of Sana'a in Yemen as hundreds of thousands of people turned out to show support for the Palestinians. The weekly demonstrations take place after Friday prayers with consistently large numbers, sometimes up to 1 million people. Well, for more on those stories and more, I'm joined now by Arise International correspondent Faith Orr. Good to see you, Faith. Let's start with that pier that we understand is being built by the Americans off the coast of Gaza. It's going to be quite a complex process, isn't it?
It is. It has already started. The construction is underway. It's a temporary pier and causeway. And as you quite rightly said, it is being built at sea. So there's 1,000 US troops helping construct it. But the US military has said there will be absolutely no troops on the ground, no boots on the ground, because it's being built at sea. And then it will be joined to land once it's constructed. They expect it to be operational early May. The aid that's going to arrive, so the aid will be screened in Cyprus, but it will still then have to go through Israeli checkpoints when it gets to Gaza, which some campaigners are scared that that will slow the process down. We know as well that it's going to be the equivalent of about 150 trucks that will be coming in there a day. Before the war, 500 trucks went through the border a day. So the aid agencies say, you know, this is helpful, but of course, if Israel would allow aid trucks in through the border, that would be a lot more helpful. There is also still the concern of aid getting to northern Gaza. The Gaza Health Ministry says it's simply not being allowed there. Israel says it's not letting aid near Hamas fighters. But of course, we know there is a large civilian population there as well. So there's that concern. And yeah, I mean, it's just how people are just wondering how helpful this is going to be. We've seen the aid drops. We know it'll be better than that, but not as good as opening the borders.
So basically this will help, but it's not a solution to the entire problem. And it is something of a race against time, isn't it? Because they're trying to avert famine in Gaza.
They are. I mean, we are seeing people dying already, children, elderly. You know, they're living in these desperate conditions. It's a man-made famine in the north, man-made hunger in other parts of Gaza. We know that famine is imminent there. We also know that people are now living amongst rubble. They're being displaced. Because of the fears of what's going to happen in Rafah, we've seen people moving back to central Gaza, to Deir al-Balah. But of course, most of the strip is now in ruins. The UN has said today that they estimate it will take 14 years to clear the debris from Gaza.
That's extraordinary.
It is. I mean, there's 37 million tons of it. And of course, amongst that, lots of unexploded shells and bombs that have been dropped. So it does just show you the scale of the operation and how life can ever get back to normal.
And talking about bombs being dropped, let's look at another story out of Gaza, and that Palestinian baby girl who was rescued from her dying mother's womb after an Israeli airstrike in Gaza. That baby has now died. You've been following that story.
Yes, so this baby, as you said, there was delivered by emergency cesarean section. She was named after her mother. She's now buried next to her mother in the cemetery in Rafah. It wasn't just the baby and the mother who's died. 17 of members of the same family died in these strikes on the family home in Rafah on Sunday. The mother was 7.5 months pregnant, so they had hoped that the baby might survive, but the baby, she was simply too premature. The grandmother had planned to adopt her. We know that of the 34,000 plus people who have been killed in Gaza in this war, 2/3 of those are women and children. So they make up a huge proportion of the victims of this war. Israel, of course, says they were targeting Hamas fighters. I mean, they say Hamas is in Rafah. There's no reason to doubt that. I think the problem is the targeting. You know, they're taking out entire family homes when Hamas are usually underground.
And meanwhile, of course, feelings running very high about the situation in the Middle East. We were reading reports there of protests in Germany, in Yemen, and of course, students' protests happening more and more at universities in the US. I understand that at Columbia in New York, campus authorities and students are locked in stalemate over the removal of tent encampments.
Exactly. We've seen hundreds of arrests across the US, and actually it's not just Columbia now in New York. We are seeing protests in camps at 4 different campuses, and that includes the Fashion Institute in Manhattan, where people have set up a camp right in the heart of Manhattan. So This is expanding. I mean, it's not even just the US. We've seen it in Berlin, across the Middle East today, Yemen and Jordan, and in Paris too. A university, a very prestigious university in Paris, currently has protesters, both pro-Palestine and pro-Israel, facing off against each other, with police standing in the middle. So certainly tensions being raised about this issue around the world, but also being raised around Israel in Gaza. More strikes today on Lebanon. We saw a stabbing in Israel by what police are calling a terrorist. The far-right security minister, Itamar Ben-Gvir, was on his way to that when his car was overturned and he's in hospital. So, you know, we are seeing lots and lots of stories around this issue today, around the world as well as in Gaza.
And of course, a lot of the talks towards ending the conflict, or at least temporarily stopping it, were taking place in around Doha, where you were a few weeks ago. Any news on what is going on as far as achieving some form of ceasefire is concerned?
The ceasefire talks have somewhat stalled. We know that Doha was considering pulling out as a mediator. We haven't heard any more on whether they're going to do that. It does seem like they're continuing in that role for the time being at least. But the problem with the ceasefire talks is they're held in Doha, they're also held in Cairo. There's never any direct talks. So, you know, the Egyptian authorities or the Qatari authorities will speak to Israel, or they will speak to Hamas, but Hamas and Israel don't speak to each other, which of course, if you're trying to reach a ceasefire, does delay things. We see various deals offered on the table, but at this moment, we know that none of these deals have been accepted.
Right. So for the moment, the war continues, and the death and destruction continues.
Exactly.
Faith, thank you very much indeed. Faith Orr is Arise International correspondent.